Okay, so the recording has started. Once again, this call is being recorded and we will place these recordings in our YouTube channel. If you're not comfortable, please drop off now. And also, this call is joined by our Microsoft team members as well as team members from our partners and customers. So, just want to give a heads up. So, we are going to be, once again, good morning and happy Friday. We're going to be uh, talking about Azure Bastion. What are some of the latest updates in Azure Bastion? And just as usual, we are going to do a quick level set, just like we always do, what this service, what problem domain is trying to address. And then we're going to talk about, um, what are some of the updates and quick demo. So this service is all about providing remote access to virtual machine in Azure as a service. Okay, so why you need to access your virtual machine to do administrative tasks, things like that, and what are some of the common ways of doing it, how you would have done it. Of course, if you have a hybrid cloud, site-to-site VPN or express route, you can you can connect to those VMs from on-prem. Another one, which is very popular, is public IP address, assign VM public IP address. It raises its own concerns because once you assign a public IP and you don't protect your VM appropriately, malicious actors can access it and cause problems. Um, then you have the load balancer. You can have a public load balancer and do through NAT access VMs behind it. That's, of course, another way of doing it. And finally, you have the jump box. You can have put a VM in Azure or set of VMs, and those have which have public IP, and then you access all the other VMs where they don't have the public IP in the same VNet or a different VNet if you have VNet peering. Okay, so these are, and once again, now you have another piece of infrastructure that you have to take care, you have to update. And how do you know how many VMs you need? You have to, kind of add VMs if a lot of people are accessing, and there's a lot of people who need to access these machines and need to use those jump boxes. Okay, so that's what is addressed by Azure Bastion. Azure Bastion lets you provides the ability to connect to virtual machines in Azure without requiring a public IP. So you can have, rest assured, you can have a VM without a public IP in Azure, and if you have deployed Bastion, and Bastion has line of sight to that VM through either it's in the same VNet as the VM or it has VNet peering enabled, both regional as well as cross regional. You can access that VM from um, Bastion. You can do a remote desktop if it's Windows or SSH if it is Linux. It's a PaaS service. You don't have to do any feeding and caring of the infrastructure that is deployed. Azure is managing those VMs. Once again, as I said, there is no agent or public IP required. So this is how a high level architecture of looks like. You have your Azure Bastion, and it's deployed in a VNet. And by the way, that being a subnet, that is, it's the infrastructure is deployed, and we will look in the demo. We will see a quick demo and look at it. Is deployed. It's called Azure Bastion subnet, and then you have your VMs. As you can see, none of the VMs have a public IP. So basically, once again, as I said, it's a VNet injected appliance is deployed in that um, subnet, and the only thing it needs is 443 over the internet, so you can expose it through NSC. That's the only thing that is needed for Azure Bastion. Then uh, you have only RDP and SSH port open on our NSGs for the virtual machines. So that's the only thing that you need. No public IPs are required. And sorry, let me go back to the screen. One thing to keep in mind that kind of really makes security hardening easy, because the only access you need to allow VMs is from Bastion. So you can add a service tag in the NSG to secure access from Azure Bastion, and that's it. There's no public access required. So there's no public IP. Nobody else can access it. They can only come through Azure Bastion. Okay. So any questions? So let's continue moving on. So here are some of the key features. Just want to sum up. We have already talked about it. Um, the key thing is no private IP or no public IP for VMs. You can access this all through public IP. Since all through private IP, there's no public IP requirement, and you do RDP and SSH through Azure portal. So all of the access is available through Azure portal. You don't need to get a special client or something for all sessions are through TLS. Okay. Um, and here are some updates. So once we had done the level set, here are some updates. Okay, before I go through it, just want to clarify one thing. Um, I heard about it, like some people ask, like, okay, what is the difference between um, Windows Virtual Desktop Service that Azure provides or Azure Virtual Desktop Service versus this? Just keep in mind, this provides you connectivity to your Azure VMs deployed, to your VMs deployed in Azure. Okay. On the other hand, Azure Virtual Desktop allows you to create virtual, um, uh, you know, allow you to create virtual desktop instances in Azure. So basically, that are there where you can do things. It kind of it's mostly for both have different uses. For example, here you have Azure VM, which are running your applications, and those are applications or a set of applications which are accessed by external or internal user. On the other hand, normally when you use Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows Virtual Desktop, you use them to kind of uh, to make sure that your own workforce don't have to have you know have infrastructure or like machines on-prem. They can use the machines in the cloud. So that's the two different use cases, and that's the two different uses for Azure Virtual Desktop versus this Azure Bastion service. So they're addressing two different concerns. Okay, so let's quickly go over the updates. First of all, when it launched, I think a year and a half back, it didn't have any SKU. It was like, okay, you do Azure Bastion, you deploy that service. Now it has two SKUs: Basic, which is the original one, and they added a standard. And what is the key difference? Standard now allows you to scale the underlying host. Before, there was no way to scale underlying hosts. Like if you have hundreds of users who want to use like this jump box type functionality, there was no way to kind of scale the underlying host so it can support that many users. Okay. Second thing, which is key, I think, when it was launched, there was no support for VNet peering. So let's say if you have 5 VNets or 10 VNets, and you want to access VMs in those VNets, at that moment, when it was launched, you have to do Azure Bastion in each VNet. Not anymore. Now you can have, if you connect these VNets through VNet peering, and that can be regional as well as cross region, you can deploy um, Bastion in one of those VNets, and as long as it has line of sight to other VNets through VNet peering, it can access you can use that Bastion to connect to VMs in that VNet. Okay. So that's one of the key key thing that has happened. Third one is if you have Linux VMs that are using SSH keys, okay? Think of it, Linux VMs using SSH keys, you can put those SSH keys in a key vault and give user, um, you know, create an access policy to give user access to those keys. And when they sign in, they can use the key vault to access. So instead of kind of, you know, uh, kind of having those key publicly exposed, you can store them or put them in any other way. You can store them in key vault and it can use the keys from the key vault. And we will see all of that in a quick demo. So any question before we head out to the demo?
So there are questions in the chat box, if you can see them.
Sorry, can you read it? Let me just see one second. Okay, yeah, let me see that. Okay, cuts more than deploying a virtual network gateway to securely does more than cost more or less. Okay, that depends. Um, I mean, if you already have the infrastructure, in some cases you are not connecting. So the first question is, does Azure Bastion cost more or less than deploying a virtual network gateway VPN to securely access VM? Just keep in mind, it's not just deploying the VPN gateway. It's at the same time you have to amount for bandwidth. And if a lot of people are accessing those VMs, then there's a lot of bandwidth going back and forth. Okay, so that you have to take into account, um, and you may have to get a higher SKU. So you have to see what works. If there are only few VMs and you already have that connectivity on-prem, you can just connect to them and you can use them. That's totally fine. It's not that, but if there are a lot of VMs and they are not routable from your on-prem environment, that is the case in some of the large organizations where they have clearly workload VNets and the VNets which are connected to their on-prem environment. Yeah, in that case, that's where Bastion can be a good solution. Okay, based on the documentation, how many VM connection can one Azure Bastion support? Based on the documentation, a single host can support 12 connections. So if I think, and we will look at it 10 or 12 connections. So we will look at the initially, if you're creating a Bastion instance standard, it create 2 hosts. It can go up to 50 hosts. So that's um, okay. What's the use case of hundreds of users? Yes, I mean you may have in large organization, possibly you can have hundreds of users who are managing tens of applications, and they need to go and access those VMs and do management. Though, I mean, it's not desirable, but it can happen. Is the client charged only? No. Once you're running the Bastion, you are charged for it, even though you may not have any VM sessions going on. Okay. Are you suggesting that all access over RDP go through Bastion? Okay, let me take it back. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just presenting this solution. If it works for your organization, you should use it. Once again, there are always pros and cons of each solution. As I said, if you are running this solution, you are paying for it, even though you are not making any connection. If you're making occasional connections, probably, it may be a good idea to have a jump box, start it up and connect to it. But if there are always people connecting from on-prem to those VMs, then Bastion is, um, you know, from Bastion, then Bastion is a good solution. What's the best practices having Bastion host on-prem or in the cloud? Okay, Bastion can only be deployed in the cloud. So that's it. And Okay, so let's go to the Azure portal and let's try to create a Bastion instance. And let me go here, Azure Bastion. Okay, so basically, you have to pick your subscription. Let's create a resource group, and then you pick your region name. Um, you have to pick a virtual network. It will require a public IP. And you can say it's a standard. So, I mean, Right now it's default. Okay, this is the one I was referring to. Instance count can go up to 50 instances. So this is based on the documentation that I have seen. I think each instance can host up to, I mean, can support up to 10, 12 connections. So just, and by the way, there is monitoring support available, so you can see, how it is going when there are people connecting to, um, you know, your Bastion, and they're going into, I mean, they're accessing VMs, how the resource utilization is going on. Are you starved? Is your Bastion starving for resources, and you can scale up and scale down? Right now, there is no auto scaling. But being said that, you can set up alerts based on monitor, and kind of scale up and scale down if you want, using some things like Logic Apps or Azure Automation. Okay, so anyways, I mean, we have to give it a name, so we can call it, uh, um, you know, and once you create it, you will pick a virtual network, for example. Yeah, you can either create new and then you will create it. I'm not going to create right now because it will take some time. I already have a Bastion host. So let's take a look at that. So this is my Bastion host. As you can see, very simple, configuration. This is the configuration of the Bastion host. How many? And by the way, you can increase the number of hosts after you have created a Bastion instance. This shows how many sessions there are going on. So right now there is one session. I'm connecting a VM to that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to kill two birds with one stone, which is showing how VNet peering works, showing how you connect, actually three, showing how you can connect a VM through using Azure Bastion. That's number one. Number two, how VNet peering works with Azure Bastion, and you can connect peered VNet. And number three, how you can use Key Vault along with Bastion. So all of three. So let's see, that's an ambitious task. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna quickly create a virtual machine. Okay, and we are going to use our resource group. We are going to call it M, and basically we are going to create it in West Europe. Here is West Europe. Here is West Europe, and we are going to use a public key, SSH key, and since there's no port exposed to the public, so that's that. In terms of networking, I already have a, um, yes. So there is, I'm going to deploy in a VNet. This is the IP address, and I'm not going to create a public IP. Okay. So let's do none. Basic security group. As you can see here, there is no public IP. I am deploying in a new VNet in West Europe. With that, I'm going to say review and create. Give it a second. Come on. So whenever there is a demo, things tend to move slowly. Okie doke. We created it. It will take, okay, yeah, this is important. So since we have created a SSH key, it's gonna ask me to store the key. So I'm gonna download it, and I am going to save it. So right now it is doing that. On the other hand, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to um, move this key into my demo folder, and from there I will, so let it run. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to store that key in, um let me bring this up. So this is my command prompt. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna store this key into Azure Key Vault. So I have an Azure Key Vault in West Europe, and I'm gonna use that to access this VM. So the key name is this, and let me just change this name here. Okay, so let's just take this command and let's run this command in this command prompt to create this key in Azure. Okay, so that has been created. So we have, just keep in mind, we have created the key. VM has already been created. So now what we need to do is we need to peer this VNet with the VNet where our bastion is. Okay, so I'm just gonna go into peering and add. And let's go in here. Let's give the name of the virtual network. That's that. Okay. Folks, I hope you're following me. I have created a virtual machine in West Europe in a VNet, and now I'm pairing this VNet to the VNet where I have Azure Bastion host. Okay, so that way I should be able to access that VM from by using the same Bastion host that I have created previously. Okay, it will take a second. It's adding the peering, and once the peering is done, then we should be able to get to the VM. And just keep in mind, it takes a minute. Once you do the peering is successful, you go to the VM, then it takes a minute for it to it to be able to connect to using Bastion. So let's go to the VM, and if I'm sure you have seen it, there are three options here: SSH, RDP, and Bastion. So let's refresh the screen one more time and let's cross our fingers. So I'm just gonna go Bastion, and it's gonna say use Bastion. Okay, and let's try it out. And it's detecting, wow, it found out that, look at that. This is the bastion it is using. This is the bastion, as I told you, I have created in advance because it takes some time. So it is using an existing bastion through cross region VNet peering. This bastion is in East US2 and the VM is in West Europe. So basically through VNet peering, we are able to connect these two together. Okay, everybody with me so far? Any questions?
I have a question. So do you
Please.
have to provide any extra security on the Bastion host?
Extra
Because that has a
security.
public, I mean,
Yes,
the best practices
absolutely. So
for.
there is a security baseline. There are, I mean, you can lock down security, only access that, I mean, the big thing is inbound 443 over the internet. Sorry, inbound 443 from Azure Cloud
Okay,
for the Bastion host. Yes, that's the one.
okay.
That's the thing that you definitely need. Okay. So basically now look at this. I have different option: SSH private key, SSH private key from local file. I'm gonna use SSH private key from Key Vault. Okay, and let me go to the Key Vault. This is my Key Vault that is in that region, West Europe, and this is the key. Remember, this is the key we just created. And if I do connect, here we go. We are in now SSH into uh, the Linux machine. Okay, we are into that machine that is running in West Europe from a bastion that we have created in East US2. Okay, so basically that's how I mean um, it's that simple to connect. But just keep in mind some things. I think I just want to kind of go over those questions. when you are running a Bastion and you are not accessing, or if you are accessing those virtual machine, you are always charged for the cost of the Bastion. Okay, so maybe you're running one host, two hosts, you are charged for that amount, no matter if you are accessing VMs or not through Bastion. So just keep that in mind. It's not an on-demand service. Second thing I want to show you here, we are in Bastion and we looked at, so there are other metrics available which lets you help how much CPU you are using. Look, I mean, there's not much CPU used, but just close this. But still, you can see that there is, I mean, based on that, you can kind of set up alerts and things like that. There is also used memory as well that will show you how much memory you are using and how much total memory is available, what is the Bastion communication status, how much is session count. So right now, I mean, there's not much session count going on, not many sessions running. And there is Bastion communication status. It's one, so that's where you can set up alerts. If it goes below one, basically it's not connecting or something like that, then you can raise an alert. So there are tools available to monitor this connectivity. You don't have to worry about the infrastructure behind the scene. Like in the case of jump boxes, you have to update those VM. No, no, sir. I mean, यहाँ पे, no, yeah, there you don't have to do anything to update. The infrastructure is all a PaaS service. All of it is managed by Microsoft. So that's some of the features that this provides. And with VNet peering and the support for increasing the number of hosts, that really helps make it kind of, you can address larger workloads and, for the kind of scenario for larger enterprises. Okay, we have one moment. Any other questions? Okay, so thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everyone joining the call, and hopefully you found the content useful. I will upload the video and the slide deck to our YouTube channel, and just keep in mind the slide deck to the link to the slide deck is in our description of the video. So uh, I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. See you next week.
Great session. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.